Hello and welcome to On the Irregular with me, Java Beret, a podcast where I chat to women from all walks of life about their own unique creative journey, how they got here, how their story has shaped their creative work, what they've learned, what has helped them, and where they plan to go from here. It's an irregular journey for so many of us, and I'm delighted to offer a platform to share these fascinating stories and wells of wisdom. In this episode, I chat to artist and community organiser Sapna Agarwal. Sapna is one of my oldest friends, having met in Manchester 20 years ago when we were both running around the city pretending to be the stars of a Jean Luc Goddard film. This was a soft, gentle talk, fitting for a rainy day across Yorkshire and Glasgow. Sapna tells me about dropping out of architecture school, how having children helped her understand her purpose, and as she describes it, the golden thread that runs through her creative practice, and the power of community, with a light peppering of reminiscing about our youth. Welcome to my conversation with the coolest girl I still know, Sapna Agarwal. Oh, thank you so much for giving me your time, Sapna. I know you're very busy.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's also, what a lovely luxury. Someone says, right, so here's an hour in which you can talk about yourself. What a lovely thing.
That's really lovely, because I know that it can also be tricky sometimes to talk about yourself or to take up that space, or so I'm always really grateful when people agree to do so, and that that you feel that you can trust me, so thank you. Would you like to start? Are you born in Bolton?
No, I was born in Salford. Sunny Salford. And I lived in Salford until I was 7.
Okay, I never knew that about you.
Yeah, so I lived there until I was 7, and then my dad and quite a lot of his contemporaries, to be honest, had this thought that they wanted to move back to India. Because I guess by that point, he would have been in the UK for about 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And him, like, I'd say all the adults I knew outside of school were probably Indian doctors, just like my mum and dad.
Mm-hmm.
And quite a few of them in the late 80s had a go at moving back to India, and none of them actually succeeded. And a big reason they didn't succeed was because they all had these children that were very culturally British,
Mm-hmm.
didn't really see themselves as Indian. Um, yeah, and I guess also for their work as well, like they'd spent the last 10 or 15 years working in the NHS, not charging people for their services,
Mm.
and then going back into an environment where you had to give people a bill at the end of their consultation. They found that really, really difficult. So, yeah, lived in Salford until we moved to India. Then we were in India for about 6 months, and then Bolton happened after that. Like, me and my brother really weren't happy. I was very vocally unhappy. I think I was a bit of a thorn in the side. I made it very clear on a almost daily basis that I wanted to go home. Um, and then they were also struggling with work. They couldn't do, they didn't have it in them to like give people placebos, and that sort of corrupt way of operating that's just normal in big cities like Delhi.
Oh wow, that's interesting. So you must have been incredibly relieved to come back then.
Yeah, yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah. It was, I guess, like when you're quite little and someone says we're going to move to another country, and you kind of think, okay, I trust you because you're the adult,
Mm-hmm.
and you do it, and you think, this can't be where I live. This isn't where I live. I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
So coming back felt like coming back to. It sounds a bit over the top, but safety, because it was familiar and I understood things and I felt like I had a place.
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, it reminds me, I guess, because I moved around quite a bit when I was little, and then we made like the big move to Spain when I was 8, and I'm incredibly grateful now looking back that that's what we did. But at the time, I was just like, but why would you take me away from my friends and everything that
Yeah.
I know? you know. It is a huge wrench. It
And
really is.
even just small things like the climate, like I grew up somewhere very cold and wet, and then I'm like living somewhere really hot, and just like even in your own body, you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And those sensory things are so magnified when you're little as well, I think.
Yeah.
So you were what, 7 or 8 when you moved to Bolton?
Yeah, I was 8 when I moved to Bolton.
And how did you settle in there?
Um, it was fine. It was, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to insult Bolton, but the way I experienced it was as quite a boring big town,
Hmm.
um, quite narrow-minded. Um, I suppose, like particularly in my teens, when I was like this slightly odd indie kid, and which is a bit of an unusual thing for a brown person. And there's a massive Asian population in Bolton, and like walking down the street, you would kind of get racist abuse from white people, and then like groups of Asian lads would sort of shout stuff at you as well because you weren't dressed in the way that they expected. And
Hmm.
yeah, I was very keen to get away.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. I was very happy when it was time to leave.
And so, growing up, so your parents are both doctors. You, I always felt like you are kind of like the personification of a creative. Because I remember the first time that I saw you, and I know that I've told you this many times, but the first time I saw you, I was on the top deck of a bus on Oxford Road in Manchester, and you were walking along the pavement, and you were dressed all in pink and yellow, with yellow socks pulled up to your knees, a pink bow in your hair, and you just looked fucking amazing. I was like, I need to know that girl. Who is that girl? I need to know her. And then I was lucky enough to know you, eventually. But like you said, you came from a family of doctors and you were living in an environment that possibly didn't nurture this creativity that's clearly within you. Where do you think that you found that? Because I know that you were really into music, weren't you, in your teens?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've always just asserted myself. And I suppose that was a problem for my parents. They didn't really like that, and it didn't sort of sit right with them, sort of culturally. Um, I don't, I don't really know where it came from or how. I know from being. I remember going to the dentist when I was about 4 or 5, and um, the dentist, like, yeah, the dental nurse, that's who she was. She was saying to me, "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was like, "I'm going to be an artist." And I just kind of, from a very young age, had sort of asserted myself, and in the same way that when we were talking about when we were in India, and I just really asserted what I wanted,
Hmm.
um, even though it didn't really sit right with other people. I suppose I was a bit bolshy,
Hmm.
kind of pushing my way through.
And I guess in a way, then that would make sense because it's like that thing of being what is it, a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
If you feel discomfort in a situation, then you look at it from different angles, and that lends itself to creative thinking and seeing the world in different ways to what is the norm, I suppose. So, because you then went to art school in Glasgow, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to art school in Glasgow for a year. I was enrolled in the architecture course, which really wasn't for me, but it was kind of the only thing that because my parents were supporting me, it was the only thing that they would consent to because they had great hopes that I would go into medicine like them or something that they considered sort of respectable.
Hmm.
I was academically very high achieving, and so the thought of going to art school and frittering all that away, like making stuff,
Mm.
was very upsetting to them. whereas architecture was sort of like a compromise, that
Yeah.
it was something that they understood, and
Hmm.
it was something that had like a clear career path. It wasn't really what I was interested in at all, and it's incredibly hard work. So I managed a year and then I dropped out. Um, yeah, it wasn't for me at all.
Yeah, because I guess I can see why it might have been considered a compromise because it's like, well, there is a creative aspect to it, there's a visual aspect to it. But yeah, it's so much more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and it's really hard work, understandably so.
Mm.
Like architects have a massive responsibility, but it wasn't the kind of work that I wasn't interested in it, so I didn't have capacity for it. But it did mean that I was kind of at Glasgow School of Art, surrounded by loads of brilliant, interesting people, um, living in the centre of Glasgow. Like you say, I was really into music, going to gigs every night, looking at lots of art, meeting people. It was it was a fantastic time.
Mm.
Just didn't really keep up with my schoolwork.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it sounds great fun. So then what brought you down to Manchester?
It was a few things. I decided I wanted to go back to art school and that I wanted to study fine art. And I had applied to Glasgow and I'd got a place, and I thought, right, this is what I'm going to do. And then there was all sorts of stuff in my personal life. So my dad's health was quite poor, so he was about to have a coronary bypass. It was his second bypass as well. Um, and my mum and dad were in Bolton, so if I went to Manchester, I'd sort of be nearby. I also was in a relationship at the time with somebody who had been given the opportunity to grow vegetables, to grow vegetables on an organic farm. So it was like an organic meat farm in the Peak District, and he had this sort of really random chance encounter where was he traveling back from, he'd gone down to Cornwall to watch the solar eclipse or something. It was something very random, and then knocked on somebody's door to say, "Would you mind if I pitched my tent in your field tonight because I'm on my way back up to Scotland and I just need to stop somewhere?" And they said, "Have you come in response to the advert?" I was like, "What advert?" Like we were offering like 2 acres of organic land rent free for a couple of years to someone to set up a veg business. And he was like, "Actually, yeah, I have come in response to it." So he ended up moving down to the Peak District, and I was quite taken with this idea of like living in a little caravan on a farm and
Hmm.
doing the self sufficiency thing, and we had ducks and stuff, um, and so I sort of moved down to Manchester and split my time between. Oh, sorry, there's a child just come in the
Oh
room.
no, it's adorable.
They've gone
Are
now.
you sure? Oh no, it was lovely. Honestly, if you need to stop at any point, just let me know. It's fine. Come on.
No, it's all right. It's just a teenager saying, "Can I get my phone now?" It's not actual news. It's just
Oh.
social media. Um, where was I? Oh yeah, so I was sort of taken with this idea of like staying on this farm, and so I split my time between central Manchester and art school and this funny little farm in the Peak District.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. So that must have been around the time that I met you then.
Yeah, I think that was like I'd been in Manchester a year when I met you, because it was
Hmm.
when you were working at the Eighth Day, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. In the whole food shop and would be hungover most days.
yeah,
Um,
dancing to Dusty Springfield, always face the shelves.
oh yeah, that was because I'd not been there very long. I think I'd only been in Manchester about 6 months or something when I met you. And I'd been really struggling to kind of find my feet and like where I fitted into the city. And I was talking to someone the other day about this, about how different Manchester was to what it is now at that time. Because when was that? Was it like early 2000s?
It would have been like 2002, maybe?
Yeah, yeah, I think so, yeah. And like I remember, like it was, of course, it's a very cool city, but it was nowhere near as kind of like, I don't know, it's very curated now, I think, in some ways.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's yeah, there's a different energy, a different sense to it. And I kind of was like, oh, I don't. And because I wasn't going to uni. I just moved to Manchester to leave home in Barcelona. So I was just living with my stepdad and got a job at this Whole Food shop. I was like, what am I doing here? What am I even doing here? I'm just kind of like hanging out. And then getting to know you opened up a whole life for me there, I think. And like we'd get just like dream up silly little creative projects. Like, remember when we
Yeah.
when we used to write little messages on round stickers and then stick them on coins
On the two things.
on 2p's, yeah, and we're like, imagine if we could get all of these little stickers that we've made into circulation and then they come back to us one day when we're getting changed from something. And I remember bus drivers were like, I'm not taking that.
No, I was just when Jean Luc Goddard died, and I was rewatching some of his films and realizing we thought we were in a French movie some
We
of the time.
did. I know, it's quite embarrassing.
We had a very twinkly view on the world.
Yeah. So you're in Manchester, you're splitting your time between the veg farm and art school. And how are you finding art school?
Um, Not very satisfying. It was not a very stimulating environment. I think, like you said, Manchester was quite a strange place at that point.
Mm.
It wasn't. It was hard to find interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were interesting things going on, but it wasn't obvious where to go for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the art school itself was quite tired. My course was quite sort of tired. The people that had been teaching on it had been there for decades. They weren't really interested. So I didn't, yeah, it didn't really live up to my expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I'm not at the art school itself, but around the art school, and like through work and through like socializing with you and all the brilliant people we met lots of interesting people, and became aware of interesting stuff that was going on, and was able to get involved with things. Yeah, but art school didn't really do for me what I needed it to do or what I hoped it would do.
What did you hope it would do?
I hope it would help me work out what my practice is.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't happen till much later.
Mm. Yeah.
I was hoping that I always did stuff, but I didn't know what the golden thread was that ran through it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping I would find that there.
Okay, well, I'd like to come back to that later. I think that's interesting. Yeah, because I remember, I think I remember from you and the time with you, a real sense of hunger. Like you were so good at collecting people and experiences and ideas of what we could do and things to do, and it always felt like it was so much fun. It always felt like an adventure with you, and you were just so driven to find something to get your teeth into and to make you fly or feel excited. And you were incredible at that, and I think you really were a huge part of like how I experienced Manchester and how I kind of explored who I was and who I figured out my identity as well. And it was a lot through just exploration with you. And I think in some ways, because we had to search it out so much in Manchester, it made us really hone in on the things that we loved. And, even if that did take the shape of thinking that we were in a French film, so be it. You know, there are worse ways to knock about in your early 20s. So I feel really grateful to you for that. It was a really fun time in my life. Thank you.
Thank you. You need a partner in crime. You can't go off and have fun on your own, can you?
Exactly. And so eventually your relationship came to an end, didn't it, with the farm? Because that must have also been, I don't know, it's odd, maybe in some ways straddling those two separate lives.
Yeah, you kind of not fully committed to either in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I wasn't going there anymore, I sort of threw myself into, like you say, exploring and sinking my teeth into projects in a fuller way, because I wasn't kind of hopping on a bus and spending half my time somewhere else and half my thoughts somewhere else, half my focus somewhere else. So yeah, kind of after that, I really, yeah, did a proper deep dive into where I was and what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Still didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah. And because I guess you had a real strong interest and passion for community and growing agriculture, and you know it wasn't like you were only focused on, say, like, oh, it's all about painting, it's all about installation art, but like it felt like you were very whole. You really, your creativity informed every aspect of your life, and you had a very wide variety of interests, so your energy was, you know, in lots of different places. And it feels like that's kind of what, when you were talking about the golden thread in your life, in your work and in your practice, it feels like that is a huge core part of how you live your life, and where you put a lot of your creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. But I didn't realize that. I, I, I think because I felt like I needed to, in my creative practice, do something with objects in space.
Mm-hmm.
And I, at that point, I was thinking that all the pulling people together and creating all these spaces for gathering was like peripheral to that. And I didn't realize that that was the actual work.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I kept going back to like, oh, sticking things on the wall with masking tape and making things, and but actually, what the work was at that point, and still is with me, is bringing people together.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you bring people together, and then the activity that those people do is almost secondary. The kind of the primary kind of drive is to gather people.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that. So, okay, so Manchester eventually came to an end. Do you want to talk a bit about what happened from there onwards?
Then I moved back to Glasgow, and um, not long after that, I started having children.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've got 4 children now, and I suppose it was through the children that I started to understand what it is that I do. So I guess particularly when I had my first child, it was such a shock to see like my identity change and my visibility change. I'd kind of gone from this like slightly odd looking girl with a big pink ribbon in her hair to completely invisible. Like people just didn't see me. I could be dressed as brightly as anything. I still dress in very, very bright clothes, and people literally wouldn't see me. I was completely invisible. Um, and you know the way you get like such a drop in status when you when you have a child, particularly if you have a child in your 20s, and the people around you are like doing wonderful things. Like all my friends were like going off and starting MFAs and starting businesses and in bands and doing fun stuff. And there I was having children and becoming invisible. So that was quite a big shock. But then I also was looking around and thinking, how do I want to be with people, but the only spaces that seem to be available are like spaces that overly focus on children and so are really boring for adults, or overly focus on adults and then children become a nuisance. And so I started, I mean, it wasn't intentional. I didn't think, right, I'm going to create lots of spaces where children and adults can be together and there can be mutual benefit. I just started, it just happened to be that I started pulling together little events, and it was often with that same sort of fanciful head on of like feeling like you're in a movie, pulling together funny little events or gatherings, but at the same time still feeling like I ought to have a creative practice that was about objects in space, and still not realising that bringing people together was enough.
This episode is sponsored by the beautifully curated shop Moonwater Treasures, selling handcrafted and vintage pieces. Moonwater Treasures was inspired by and born from a passion for Philippines' rich culture, traditions and heritage. They work with artisans in different regions of the Philippines and India, with skills such as handlooming, buri weaving and woodblock printing that have been passed down from generation to generation. Moonwater Treasures also love anything vintage, and linked to their childhood growing up in a very traditional Filipino household where all home decors were inherited. From dinner plates, clay jugs, wicker baskets to wooden chests, which had travelled across the Pacific. They adore the stories behind each of these finds. Moonwater Treasures donate part of their proceeds to causes such as supporting Filipino children and their families by offering scholarship grants to ease the financial burden of education. And they take pride in conducting free yoga classes in schools and residential care homes for street children through collaboration with the Child Pose Yoga Philippines, as well as organising beach cleanups and tree planting activities in the northern regions of the Philippines. You can find Moonwater Treasures online at moonwater.uk, on Etsy and on Instagram at Moonwater Treasures.
But at the same time, still feeling like I ought to have a creative practice that was about objects in space, and still not realising that bringing people together was enough.
Yeah, I can really identify with that, actually. I think it's definitely something that I question a lot. It's like, well, what is my work? So it's like, yeah, I draw and I just like putting loads of old stuff together on shelves. You know? And I write, but I don't know what I write. I just write thoughts. You know, it's kind of unstructured. And then I've created this podcast where I talk to other women about their creative journey, and it's like, well, yeah, what is it?
Right, so I had an epiphany about 10 years ago. I was introduced to this children's book called Frederick. And I realised that actually I have based my whole life around Frederick without realising it. So Frederick it's just called Frederick, and it's by Leo Leone. And it's about these little mice, and there's 5 little mice, and they're preparing for the winter. And 4 of them are like gathering nuts and straw and things that mice eat. And they're like working away. And they keep looking over at Frederick, like, Frederick, what are you doing? And Frederick's just sort of dreamily gazing off into the distance. And he's like, I'm collecting light for the winter is dark. And they're like, oh, blinking heck. And then and they're carrying on like the little industrious mice gathering their bits and bobs. And like, Frederick, what are you doing now? He's like, I'm gathering colours for the winter is grey. And they're like, oh, Frederick. And they carry on gathering their bits and bobs. And then they're like, Frederick, now what? And Frederick's like, I am gathering words because we'll run out of things to say. And then the winter comes and they go into their little place, burrow maybe, and they eat all their nuts and their straw, and they have a party, and they're loving all their supplies, but then their supplies run out. But there's still loads of winter left. And they turn to Frederick and they're like, so Frederick, what about the things that you gathered? And Frederick gets them to close their eyes, and he talks to them about the light in the summer and the light in the spring and the autumn, and they feel warm and they feel, yeah, they sort of get a glow from it. And then Frederick talks to them about the colours, and they can really picture the colours in their heads, and it really raises their spirits. And then they say, and what about the words? And then Frederick recites this poem for them that he made up, and it just makes them feel really alive. And I realised that I want to be Frederick. And I think that you're possibly Frederick too.
Oh, Sapna, that's so beautiful. we're Fredericks.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that is so wonderful. And also, just hearing you tell me that story has just made me think what a wonderful teacher you must be for your kids, because you homeschool as well, which is a whole other huge part of your life.
Yeah.
Your kids are so lucky.
Well, I guess we'll find out when they're a bit older. You know what Philip Larkin said. Yeah, so the home education is just really, I kind of can't imagine life being different. Because there's no, and I guess this is the same with my work and possibly with your work as well, there's not a clear distinction between work and play and life.
Yeah.
And it's the same with home educating as well. The learning happens constantly, and it happens very organically, and play is a big part of it. Play is absolutely necessary for everybody at every age. Like, if I'm not playing in some way, then there's part of me that's shriveling up and like slowly dying off. You know, like, we all need to play.
I feel like you have a really strong, how do you say it? Well, not balance, but you have such a strong, clear, sharp intellect, but then also are highly skilled at playfulness and silliness and exploration. I think it's such a powerful combination. And I guess also that's what makes you so great about creating these spaces and bringing people together, because you understand it on so many different levels, and because you're really great with people as well, and you kind of see the whole picture. So it makes a lot of sense.
I don't know if this is true. I'm just going to say this. We'll work out whether this is true. But I wonder if intellect can only really flourish if there is playfulness. Because intellect isn't just about kind of storing away other people's ideas. It's about thinking around things, and play is like that as well. Play is exploration and thinking around things, testing things out.
Yeah.
Like trying on different identities or personalities or different ways of doing things.
And so, how do you find time now, like with 4 kids and homeschooling? I know, a couple of them are older, and how do you find time to continue to nurture your play, your mind, and what you find interesting, and keep on finding things that you want to explore?
I guess I don't really know how to answer that, because they're not so separate. So, for instance, this afternoon me and the children are going to go and look at an exhibition at Tramway because I think they'll enjoy it, but I want to go to it as well. Um, I yeah, they're really aware of what my interests are, and it's not unusual for me to be, and even when they were very little, for me to be reading a book or making something while they're just playing around me. When they were very little, it was like the evenings, they would go to bed early, and then evenings were times when I would kind of see people and I'd just be like myself and not myself as a mother. But yeah, everything's very sort of integrated.
That leads to a very rich life.
Yeah, I mean, there's always lots going on. It's not like smooth and calm and uncluttered. It's uncluttered. It's very cluttered in all sorts of ways.
And do you still try and, how did you put it, place pieces in space? And then, like, do you still create work in that way?
No, I don't do that anymore. I don't. I kind of don't feel like I have to. I might sometimes make things. At the moment, I'm kind of going through a bit of a phase of embroidering words from books that I guess I just want to, like, if there's words that I want to really hold on to, like putting the words places. But I don't feel the need to have objects in space. I think I'm happy with, well, content with my practice as a more sort of social sculpture.
Social sculpture, that's such a great way of putting it. If you were to give yourself, and I know that titles are meaningless, but if you were to give yourself a title, would it be social sculptor? I mean, that's fabulous.
Maybe that it makes me sound a bit like I've got a bit too much power, and I don't really want to have like all the power. So maybe not social sculptor. I have to think about that. I often say that I'm a community organiser, which sounds a bit dry, but the community aspect feels really important. And like, I want to bring people together, but I don't want to control the situation. I might want to curate the setup. I might want to make sure the space is comfortable and make sure there's, like, I don't want to say the right people, but like, yeah, maybe the right people in the space, but I don't want to control what happens in it. So yeah, social sculpture feels a bit too much like God.
You'd make an excellent God. I'd vote for you to be God.
Oh, imagine if we could vote for who's God. What kind of voting system would we use for that?
So, do you want to tell me a bit about the kind of gatherings that you've organised over the years and what you focus on?
I have done all sorts of things. I suppose. So a few little examples. So when I think this is when I just had one child, there was a chip shop across the road that did really good chips, and they also had like the kind of, I don't know, the space felt like you should have a party in it. So I'd like organise parties in the chip shop, and then I started, when I was first thinking about home educating, there wasn't any sort of community really. There weren't groups, there weren't anything like that. And so me and a friend started a weekly group, and with the there's always a feeling of like you can do anything, so we would do all sorts of ridiculous things. I'm really struggling to think of anything now. um, so I guess celebrations, but celebrations of the everyday. So I do an awful lot of like bringing people together, and we celebrate, and we might just celebrate because we're all together, or for whatever reason, like bringing people together, encouraging them to bring food, always some playing. For a while, I was doing quite a bit of like kind of community activism. I still do a bit, but there'd always be a slightly performative element to it. So it's not just like people in the streets waving placards. There'd always be something that felt a little bit theatrical. So, for instance, I organised this. There was at our local museum, at Kelvin Grove Museum, there was a big dinosaur that was there for a bit. And it was like the skeleton of a big dinosaur, Diplodocus, that was called Dippy. And I sort of pulled things together so that a friend of mine who's a fiddler was in the space, and I got lots of people together and sort of secretly passed a message around that when the fiddler plays a really sad tune, we all lie down and pretend to be dead. So I guess it's become a bit of a form now, a dying. And we lie there for a certain amount of time, and then when the fiddler plays a happy tune, we get up and we're alive again, and we go outside, and there's games and food. And so, like, gatherings where people can feel like they're part of something together are really important to me. At the moment, I run a community anti-racist library, and we have lots of books. We go out into the local park with all these books. And the thing that people seem to want more than anything is to talk and to be with other people that they can talk to. And so just trying to find ways of like making it possible for people to linger around each other using whatever vehicle is to hand. So in this case it's books, and you notice that people want to linger, so next time you bring out chairs and you bring out a flask of tea, and the next thing you've got interpreters. And
God, it's incredible how much strength there is in what is essentially something quite simple. Like you said, people want to gather and want to talk, want to communicate, and want to feel part of a community. And there is an endless need for that. But not everybody knows how to create that. So that's so wonderful that you've identified that, and that has become, like you said, the golden thread that runs through your work, because it's incredibly powerful. It's what I always come back to: community and sharing stories and sharing ideas and just sharing space with people, and like you said, celebrating the everyday, because what else is there?
Yeah.
You know.
And I always say that if I when I die, if I have a headstone, it should say community is the answer to everything.
Yeah. It's funny, I had a conversation yesterday with someone, and we were talking about how love is the answer to everything, and they're essentially the same thing in many ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, community and love. Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And it's the core. It's the core of life, I think.
And I suppose it sort of also speaks a bit, for me personally, to that idea of being a square peg in a round hole. It's not how the world's set up at the moment. We're really, really encouraged to be hyper individualistic, to not rely on each other, to not be vulnerable with each other, to not. I think a lot. I don't know. Maybe I'm speaking too generally, and it's just some of us. But like, I have like this massive capacity for love and for care, and you want to put it out into the world, and the world doesn't really seem to have space for it.
Yeah.
So if you can, like, I want to make spaces for that. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. I really understand that. Yeah. I feel very similar in some ways. Like, I sometimes feel like I'm overwhelmed with love and, like you said, care that I want to give, and it's like, I don't know where to put it. Where can I put it? Okay, let's have a dinner party.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. I was just saying to the kids yesterday, I had this idea. I've been having troubles with one of my neighbours, and it's been really unpleasant. And I was like, what's going to make me feel better? Maybe we could do like a community litter pick and daffodil planting. That's going to make me feel better. And they were all slightly rolling their eyes at me because they've heard this sort of thing so many times. But it will make me feel better, because if people come out and do that, just that feeling of like being part of something and that lavishing care. Yeah, to me, that's what it feels like to be human.
Yeah.
Or Frederick.
Yeah, that's so wonderful and valuable for your kids to see that and to witness that, and for that to just be like a normal, integrated part of their life.
I hope that, I mean, like I say, I'm not. You don't know what your kids are gonna, what's gonna land.
Yeah.
How things are going to land with your kids, but I hope what they take away from their childhood is a feeling of responsibility towards other people in the wider world, and that being something that isn't a burden but is a thing that can bring immense joy. So I'm a really, really big fan of volunteering, because I just think that the benefits of doing things for other people, there's a huge benefit to yourself as well. Just, it's that participation, feeling like part of something. It's like a very, to my mind, a very basic human need.
And so, this is the core of your work, and going forward, I can imagine you're just going to find different ways of growing it and exploring it.
Yeah, and taking it seriously. Like, not too seriously, obviously, but valuing it, because I think up until fairly recently, I've thought of it as like very peripheral. It's like, oh, it's something I do as well as all the other stuff I do. I'm like, no, it's like goes right through the centre of everything I do.
And it fulfills so many aspects of what you love and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, and the hunger that you were talking about, that was there in my early 20s, is still there, but it's sort of satisfied by bringing people together and watching what happens and feeling like you're part of something.
And coming up with wonderful ideas like getting a fiddler to play by Dippy and telling people when to lie down and pretend to be dead. I mean, it's just brilliant. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Sapna.
Thank you. It's so nice to talk to you.
Is it raining there?
It's raining really heavily.
Same here.
Yeah.
I can hear the rain. I can't tell if it's my window pane or your window pane.
Probably both.
Oh, it's been so lovely hearing more about your story, because we were kind of absent from each other for 15 years, really, weren't we? And to hear a bit more about like how things progressed, and how, I suppose, having kids really in some ways, like you said, kind of revealed to you what it was that meant the most and that you enjoyed the most, and what was your practice.
Yeah, I think something I realised when I had children was you kind of can't, like, time became very different. In one way, time just went on and on and on, and it just felt like it stretched ahead of you and it just moved so slowly. And in another way, it was just slipping by so quickly. I suppose that thing that people say about the days are long but the years are short.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it felt like I don't have time to waste. I need to, yeah, to do the things that feel important.
You are. You very much are.
And I think you are as well. I remember really clearly the first time we were on a shift together. I think you were about 19, and you told me about how you used to collect like photos of old movie stars,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 bound up in that was very much about collecting stories. And this is what you're doing now as well.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like the essence of you stayed. It's kind of you stayed very true to the essence of Java.
Yeah. And you know what? I think having kids also helped me re-establish that, because I felt so lost for a long time. Like I was, all these different things, and like, am I an actor? Am I gonna be a writer? Do I just like throw dinner parties? Like, I don't know what. And then having kids really somehow it made me really, really dig deep and really kind of have to get to the core of like, what is it? What is it? And it's funny you saying that about me collecting photos of movie stars. I've always been obsessed with collecting photos of people that I don't know. And I was tidying my desk the other day and I found a box that I have of old French photos of people that are long dead. And they're one of my most treasured possessions because there's just infinite stories that I can read into each photo. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about stories, is that they are infinite and there are different angles on each story and each person has a different experience of that story, and whether it be in words or someone's life, or just a story that's told through objects, or an illustration, whatever it is, or just the story of a morning when you go for a walk.
And it's storytelling and story making and listening to stories. Like, it's such a kind of ancient, basic human activity. It's like how our ancestors would have understood the world through stories.
Yeah.
And like, we kind of, I think sometimes things get explained away a bit too much at the moment, when actually stories explain a lot more.
I know, we're all obsessed. It's why, that's why some people, I'm addicted to TV shows, and I used to be really embarrassed about it, because I should be reading, I shouldn't be watching stuff. But it's essentially, it's watching, if it's a well told story. I'm not addicted to everything, but like, if it's a well told story, it's about relationships, it's about how we find ourselves in the world, it's about passion, it's about grief, and it's all just, we're all searching to kind of see in some ways our experience reflected elsewhere.
Yeah. I think it's I mean, I can just almost hear my children in the background rolling my eyes when I say this. Um, Patriarchy has got a lot to answer for, in that it makes like our interest in stories seem frivolous.
Mm.
It talks about, like, I suppose like a stereotype is like women and gossip, and
Mm-hmm.
actually it's women that tend to kind of maintain social bonds, and they're the most important things in our lives.
Yeah.
It's not frivolous, it's the stuff of life.
Yeah.
And perhaps it's maybe I'm overblowing things, or perhaps it's a radical act to sort of give that value and to sort of elevate it and say that it is worthwhile and it's really important to gather stories and to hear other people's stories, to witness other people in their lives and be witnessed ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the things that I really feel is so important about talking to women for this podcast, is giving people a space to tell their story, because it's so incredibly valuable. And I think when you're within your story, you often just don't really you don't notice it because you're living it. But to actually say to someone, like, okay, please, can you pause? Can you give me some time? And can you tell me your story? I think can be really profound for to be able to reflect on yourself and kind of look back and see it in a different way and piece the pieces together, because then it gives you clarity in other areas of your life. So, and then it's an act of generosity, because you're sharing your story that other people are going to get so much out of, and people are going to get different things out of. And like, I remember someone telling me that every episode of the podcast, they learn something about themselves through somebody else. Yeah, through someone else's story. Nice. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm always saying, like, encouraging people, tell your story, because you have no idea. It will be valuable for you, but you have no idea what other people will get from it as well.
And the elements that you tell are just the elements that you tell on that day, because so there's always so much more. Yeah. Like with your photographs as well. There's so many different angles of different facets, like a disco ball.
That is a fantastic metaphor.
Maybe your podcast is just a big disco ball. With all these little mirrors reflecting back onto people.
Oh my God, I fucking love that.
We used to have a disco ball hanging up in Leda's room when they were little, and when the sun shone in at a particular time, we called it magic time, because there was all these like little spots all over the room. And yeah, that's what your podcast is.
Brilliant, that's a new tagline. Sapna is far too cool to be on Instagram, but if you're local to Glasgow, do say hello and pop along to one of Sapna's events. Thank you to Moonwater Treasures for sponsoring this episode, and thank you for listening to On the Irregular. Please remember to rate, review and subscribe, as it helps other listeners find us.